As someone who recently played Sonic Adventure 2 for the first time and posted it on the internet for the world to see, I noticed that a lot of people have different opinions than me, while plenty have the same or similar. Because of this, I wanted to rank the stages myself and see exactly what others thought. Since this is purely subjective, I will try my best to elaborate and explain why I rank the stages the way I do, but that leads me to this. Disclaimer: these opinions are exactly that. Opinions. They are not objective truth and are purely subjective reflection of my feelings on the stages after my first playthrough. As I just noted, I have only played this game through one time, and I'm sure that my rankings of many of these stages might change on a replay of the game. Like any Sonic game, mastering the stage changes drastically how the stage will play in the future. Since I'm positive some of you will disagree with my rankings, I encourage you to let me know in the comments, as I love to hear other perspectives, but please do so respectfully. And if you agree with me, let me know as well. Of course, if you enjoy this content, feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, starting off first, we've got City Escape. If you watched my series, you might know that my experience with City Escape was a little less than conventional, I guess you could say, but I had a pretty good time with it, and I definitely enjoyed it. I think on successive playthroughs, it's definitely gonna be a better experience than what I had on my first playthrough. However, being such an iconic level and, you know, me not having the best information going into it, I think it would be pretty criminal to put it anywhere below like A tier. All right, I'm gonna do Route 101 and 280 together since they're, you know, more or less the same mission, just slightly different. And I think this might be my first controversial take of the list, so let me know what you think. I really like these missions, which is weird to me too, because I don't really like any other, you know, racing games. I don't play Mario Kart or Forza or Need for Speed or whatever. So racing games really aren't a thing for me, but I like these missions, so I don't know. I will say I did like Rouge's Route 280 a little better, just because it had, you know, some actual higher stakes. There were some cliffs you could fall off, some jumps over gaps. So it was just like a little cooler than Tails' version of, like, I don't know, just driving straight and hitting an occasional drift, which was sick. Don't get me wrong, but, you know, just not the same. I would have liked to see more obstacles, maybe some enemies or some roadblocks or something to make it, you know, a little more intense. But overall, I think I enjoyed it a little bit, which is why, don't crucify me, I'm gonna put them both into B tier, but like kind of a high B tier. Yeah, like that. All right, Wild Canyon. Similar to City Escape, didn't really have a very normal experience with it, so I can't really rank it all that fairly. So I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm gonna put it in like a low B tier. I really didn't like the Knuckles missions very much, so this is probably somewhere around here, but considering I didn't have a normal experience with it, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, and we'll throw it up here. All right, Prison Lane was a pretty, you know, mediocre mission. It wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it was just kind of there. It was kind of your intro Tails mission, nothing spectacular, and so I'm gonna rate it as nothing spectacular. It was kind of a C tier mission. All right, Metal Harbor. This was one of my favorite Sonic missions in the game, probably like top 3. And I think definitely when I go back and play the game again, I think I'll like it even more than I did. I was still very fresh to the game, my first time playing it at not a crazy speed. So I think now with a better understanding of the game, I could definitely explore, you know, some alternate routes. I've seen people get to the top route of the rocket. I really want to do that. So yeah, I like this mission a lot. I'm giving it A tier. Now, Green Forest, also another one that I really liked. I don't know if this is a popular mission or not. I never hear people talk about it, but I really liked it. Just the vibe of it was pretty sick. I think there's something so cool about like running on the inside of like a hollowed out tree. Sick. It's another mission where for me, it was a little too early in the game to fully like appreciate it, but I still think it's one of my favorite. It's probably my second, if not third favorite Sonic mission in the whole game. So I'm also gonna put it in A tier, but I think I'm gonna put it above Metal Harbor, and that might be crazy to say, but I'm saying it. Pumpkin Hill. Oh man, where do I start? I hated this mission. I did not like this mission at all. I think it's easily either my least favorite or second least favorite Knuckles mission in the game. It was also my first, you know, normal experience of a Knuckles stage, and this mission took me way too long. There were some Knuckles missions, you know, that were like okay, but this one just felt like it was like way too spread out, and as someone who had never played a treasure hunting mission before in their life, again, Wild Canyon didn't really count for me. This mission was just so slow and so tedious, and I really didn't like it at all. So I'm putting it in the D tier. All right, Mission Street, honestly, I don't really know the community's opinion on this, but I kind of enjoyed the Tails missions, and to an extent the Dr. Eggman missions as well. I think they started getting a little old towards the end of the campaigns, but Mission Street I thought was one of the better ones. You know, it was the first mission, you get the glider, and just having all of the jets flying by and dropping bombs while the bridges are collapsing. It felt like very high stakes, and I thought it was just kind of a fun, intense mission, and so I really liked it, and I am going to put it into the B tier right about here. All right, Aquatic Mine. This was my favorite Knuckles mission. This is the only time you might hear me like actually praise a Knuckles mission. I thought this one was pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. I can't go through it without talking about the soundtrack. In general, the soundtrack for Knuckles missions are pretty good, but I think this one took the cake for me. It was just so groovy, so good. I still think about it. But outside of that, I thought this mission wasn't too spread out. It wasn't too condensed, and I kind of liked the water gimmick for it, where you had to raise the water level to certain levels to get to certain areas. I thought it was pretty cool, and just generally the best Knuckles mission. So I'm gonna put it to the low B tier. All right, Hidden Base was kind of one of those missions for Tails that was pretty forgettable for me. I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was, you know, in the moment I thought it was pretty fun, cool scenery being in the desert, and you know, just kind of okay. And so because of that, I'm kind of just putting it in the okay tier, largely for the fact that I just actually forgot about it until I was making this video. Pyramid Cave is probably my most like meh Sonic stage. I don't think it was bad, and I don't think it was great. I feel like now that I have a better understanding of the game, it would probably be more fun, but on a first playthrough, it didn't stand out. It was just kind of there, and I think that's okay. I don't think it wasn't bad. It wasn't miserable. It just kind of was, and so I feel like that kind of earns it a spot in the C tier. Death Chamber. Following the most meh Sonic stage was probably the most meh Knuckles stage. This wasn't one of those ones that made me want to pull my hair out or curse God or anything like that. It was just kind of there. It just kind of happened, and that's all I can really say about it. And if you see the pattern here, you can find out that that'll earn it a spot in the
That's right, square hole
C tier. But because I dislike Knuckles missions, it's going in the low C tier. Eternal Engine was one of those missions where it had high highs and low lows. It was the first mission I played, at least of the mech variety, where you encounter the imperfect chaoses, the blue guys, and you know, the current version of me knows how to deal with those, but finding out how to deal with those for the first time in a mech was pretty miserable, and that ruined the level a little bit for me. I think otherwise it would probably earn a higher spot, but instead it kind of earns its spot in the higher C tier. Meteor Herd. This is a mission that I have pretty mixed feelings about, but generally concise feelings about. I wasn't a big fan. At first I was like, oh cool, we get low gravity, we're in space, this is gonna be so fun as Knuckles, you know, to fly around. It wasn't that. Spent a lot of time getting hit by flying meteorites that you couldn't even look at to see coming, and they didn't have audio cues. Not to mention the radar for finding the gem pieces didn't work for half the mission. Then on top of that, you got more of the blue guys just hitting you for fun, and yeah, I don't know, it was just way too spread out. Wasn't for me. I think it would be generous to put this in the low C tier, but I'm not feeling generous. I'm putting it in the D tier, but it's still better than Pumpkin Hill though. All right, Crazy Gadget, F tier. No, I'm just kidding. If you know me and you watched my videos on it, you know how I feel about Crazy Gadget. I think it was Sonic's worst stage in the game. However, that being said, I don't genuinely think it's a bad level. I think it's a level that tried something new, and you know, I can respect that. It was different. It had cool potential, but I think that's about all it had in my opinion. Now, I think a lot of the problems with that were the game itself. You know, if you could have had a little bit better control of the camera, a little less jank on the every control being mapped to the B button kind of thing, it would have been a better mission. However, you know, it just fell into a 20-year-old game and it wasn't perfect. I think if there was like a remake in like a Sonic Generation style of Crazy Gadget, it would probably be an awesome stage. But because of that, I'm gonna put it right behind Pyramid Cave. Final Rush, my sweet baby Final Rush. I loved this stage. I don't know what it was about it, but there was just a certain sense of adventure and whimsy that just was carried throughout this stage that just, it made me feel good, it made me feel alive, and I don't know. It even had its like fair amount of challenges and jank, but for some reason I can't find a flaw in this stage. I really loved it, and for that it is earning its spot in the S tier. Alright, Iron Gate. This was essentially just Tails' prison lane, but backwards. It wasn't bad, it wasn't great, it was just kind of there. But since I had played the hero story first, it kind of felt like just a repeat of Prison Lane. So I think it earns its spot in the C tier, but just right behind Prison Lane. Just slightly. Now, Dry Lagoon was a mission that was just kind of okay. It was basically Knuckles' Wild Canyon, but just a slightly different version. The big pro of it is that it had turtles. Awesome. Love turtles. Who doesn't love turtles, guys? It feels weird to say this because I think it is a better version of Wild Canyon. I think Wild Canyon is only up here on the list because I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. I think that benefit might be a lot more overpowered than it's actually worth. And I think Dry Lagoon probably falls into the C tier. I could argue with myself that it could be like a low B tier, but I'm not going to. And realistically, I think Wild Canyon should be much lower on the list. Actually, what the Aquatic Mine should definitely be above Wild Canyon. Sand Ocean, you know, you're gonna see this pattern probably a lot in the second half of the video because a lot of the stages are basically just repeats of their hero side counterpart. Sand Ocean is essentially just Hidden Base, but Eggman's version. The one thing I will say about it that it sets itself above Hidden Base is there's a little section at the end where you get some ramp sections and you get some explosions and some cinematic pieces, and that sets it just slightly above Hidden Base, but for the most part it's essentially just Hidden Base, which is why it's going right here. It also has the downside of some slow platforming, those rotating platforms. If you know, it's like if you miss it just barely, you gotta wait for a whole rotation and it's just kind of a pain. Radical Highway. Oh boy, I loved this stage as well. This is probably my second favorite stage in the whole game. So without giving away the ranking too much, this stage was awesome. I think it had some of the best like fluidity in the game, and honestly I just had a blast. I think on a repeat playthrough this could be even my favorite stage. I think on the first playthrough though, I wasn't ready to fully handle all that Radical Highway had to offer me, and I think that's the only reason it's not in S tier. I think it's a very high A tier, and there's definitely an argument to be made for S tier, but it just didn't make me feel the same way Final Rush did, so I can't feel like putting it up there. But incredible stage, really loved it, damn near perfect. Egg Quarters was essentially just a worse version of Death Chamber in my opinion. Like, at least in Knuckles' version of Death Chamber you could crawl through the walls to get to different sections, but for some reason Rouge couldn't do that. So I think needless to say it just kind of falls right here. I don't think there's really much else to say. Lost Colony is essentially just Tails' Eternal Engine. However, I actually think it was slightly worse. I think Tails' Eternal Engine, at least in my specific case, since I played the hero story first, had a little bit of like excitement to it because it was a new experience. However, I think playing the same experience again for me made it a little bit worse. So I think this kind of falls in just right here. It's just a slightly worse version of Eternal Engine to me. Weapons Bed. Now, I don't think Weapons Bed was inherently a bad mission, but hear me out. I think the fact that it took place in Metal Harbor, which was one of my favorite stages already, made it more disappointing. Like, to be in an environment where you had so much fun before, and now you're kind of just moving a slow, clunky mech around, holding down your lock-on button and hitting everything you can, made this mission more disappointing. Let me know if you agree with that or if that's just my weird way of thinking, but I think because of that it kind of earns its slot in the low C tier. Now I feel like this one might be a hot take, but I actually enjoyed Security Hall a good amount. I don't know if that's crazy to say or not, so let me know if I'm crazy. I think that I kind of enjoyed the urgency of it, like having a time limit on it. You know, it was obviously stressful, but I think it just kind of made it a little more intense. I think that if this mission had been done just a little bit better, it could have earned its way up a lot higher. But I liked the idea of all like the lasers and whatnot. I just thought it was like a cool concept. But yeah, I mean, still, I think it lands itself in the C tier, but probably like an upper C tier, like here. White Jungle was essentially just a shorter version of Green Forest, but for Shadow. It was good, but to me it was just too short. That's all it was. I think if this mission had been, you know, even 50% longer to twice as long, it could have earned a spot way higher. But because it was just so short, I think it can only go as high as probably the high B tier. I did like the rope swinging and some of the light speed sequences in it, but there just wasn't enough of it for me to rank it higher than B tier. Skyrail, I feel very similarly to how I felt about White Jungle. It was good, but again, it was just so short. And I know some of this stuff was last minute thrown together, development time was rushed, some of it was intended to be a Sonic stage and then it just got scrapped and thrown in as a Shadow stage. I get it, you know, but that doesn't change what it is, and that doesn't change what we're playing. It just was a short stage, and that's all I can really say about it. The one downside I will say is that it did remind me of Pumpkin Hill, and I hate Pumpkin Hill. No, that's not a real downside of it, but yeah, but I think because of that, it earns itself a spot, probably in the low to mid B tier, probably about there. Now, Mad Space is definitely a mission that I think a lot of people didn't like, and I get it. I completely get it. The camera controls, the gravity situation, it was all very janky. However, much in the same way that I don't genuinely think Crazy Gadget was a bad level, I think Mad Space had a lot of potential too. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not throwing it up along with the greats or anything, but I do think that it wasn't as bad as a lot of people think it was. I think it had a lot of potential, but I think it can only earn a spot in probably the middle C tier. I think probably right around here, yeah, something like that, you know, give or take a spot or two. I think this one could be a hot take. Cosmic Wall, didn't hate it. Borderline, kind of liked it. It was definitely a little long for my taste. Pause. But the part that really stood out to me were the rail grinding sections. Something about those just felt like I was on a Disneyland ride or something. Just grinding on a rail, locking onto targets. It's way better than like the other missions where you're just like on an elevator and your feet are locked in place and you can just pivot around shooting things. It also kind of felt like those, you know, Jurassic Park arcade games. Anyway, I don't know. Let me know if you feel similar. And on top of that, you also get the ability to finally use the booster vertically. I mean, obviously it's due to the low gravity, but this stage actually made like more of an impact on me than any of the other Eggman missions probably. And so I'm actually gonna give it a spot in the low B tier, which feels kind of crazy to say, but it made more of an impact on me than stages like Pyramid Cave or anything like that. Final Chase is a stage that I wanted to be better than it was. That doesn't mean it's bad by any means. It's just with Sonic's Final Rush being such an awesome stage to me, I was really hoping that the finale to Shadow Story was going to live up to that, and it didn't. It wasn't bad by any means. I still really enjoyed it, but it probably earned itself a spot in about B tier. I think probably about here. The little gravity spirals weren't my thing. It was a cool concept. I'm glad they tried something new. Didn't really stick for me. That's all I can really say. Cannon's Core was a cool mission. I think there were definitely some frustrating areas. I'm looking at you, Knuckles. No, I'm not blaming Knuckles actually for this one, because apparently there's a power up that I missed somewhere that allows you to breathe underwater, and I think if I had that, the mission would have been completely different in my eyes. So I'll set that one aside, because my only real problem with that was the little air bubbles making you sink when you breathe them in, and then you hit the lasers and you die. Anyway, sorry, getting off track on that one. Overall, the rest of it I really liked. I like the concept of a nice team up mission. I mean, who doesn't? It could definitely be frustrating, you know, if you make it to like the last section as Sonic and then you die and you have to replay everyone else's sections. I get it, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good, and I think it earns a spot probably about here. Maybe here. You know, one of these two spots. And finally, Green Hill. F tier. I haven't played Green Hill. I even saw this on the tier list and I was like, Green Hill's in what? I didn't know this was in this game. Yeah, I've only played the game through once. I have not unlocked this, but I'm sure it would be up here. I'm sure it's awesome. I'm sure it's great. And there we have it. There's our Sonic Adventure 2 stage tier list. But now we have to talk about the bosses, because I'm going to be honest with you, the bosses in this game kind of suck. Now, that's no shade to this game, but we got to be real. I mean, you can look at the list and see that it's just recycled bosses over and over. And I get it. Do what you gotta do, but we gotta talk about it. Starting off strong with the Bigfoot, the first boss of the game. This was a very weird boss for me. Again, if you haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch the first part of this series. It'll explain why a lot of the ratings of the early stages are so weird. And because of that, I'm gonna rank this one probably a little higher than these two. So this is Sonic's Bigfoot. I think I'm gonna put it in the B tier. It was still a little bit frustrating of a boss. It was a little janky. The homing attacks did not always hit the way I wanted it to. Then at the start of the dark story, we've got Shadow's Hotshot. I guess it's not Bigfoot, it's Hotshot, but still. Same thing, whatever. And this is essentially the exact same fight. And you know, if you started the dark story first before you did the hero story, I get it. This is going to be your first boss, sure. But there are a number of reasons I think this is worse than Sonic stage. First of all, you don't even get to play Shadow before you play as Shadow against this boss. So if you go in blind, maybe this is your first Sonic game ever. You've never played Shadow. The game doesn't teach you anything about playing Shadow. It just throws you at this boss and says, figure it out, which I think just makes this worse. At least for Sonic's Bigfoot, you get to play it City Escape first. So you get to figure out how the controls work. You get Omochao to teach you how to play the game if you don't already know. So I just think this is a significantly worse version of the boss, which is of just the same boss. Now Rouge's version is a little different, and honestly I still can't decide if it's for better or worse. The better part is that it's different. You know, Shadow and Sonic's are essentially exactly the same. Rouge's at least has the element of climbing on the walls and flying to hit this thing, because in its third stage, it doesn't ever land. And that's cool. I think that makes it slightly better than Shadow's. But man, there's a lot of waiting around in this fight. And I mean, same goes for the other ones, but I feel like you feel it more in Rouge's stage, because you're just hanging on a wall, waiting for the boss to be vulnerable, and it just feels like such a pain. Still, I think I'm gonna have to rank it slightly above Shadow's, just because it's different at least. Now, for a lot of these bosses, I'm going to be ranking them in pairs. So, Dr. Eggman Tails on Prison Island, Dr. Eggman Tails Space Colony Arc, Knuckles and Rouge, you know, you get it. Dr. Eggman and Tails on Prison Island, I think, sucks. I think there is no skill involved. I think it's literally just button mashing. Now, as much as I got angry at the repeat bosses of the Bigfoot fight, these bosses don't even feel like bosses. Like, at least against the Bigfoot and Hotshot and whatnot, you had to like run around and dodge attacks and, I don't know, wait for openings. On Dr. Eggman and Tails, you kind of just hold a directional stick and mash your attack button. Like, it's really nothing. Both of these fights were over in like seconds for me, so I'm going to put them both in D tier. Now, Egg Golem, I'm going to rank separately because these are two very different fights. The Egg Golem for Dr. Eggman is not a great fight. I'm going to be honest, it's not a great fight. There's only so much you can do to dodge in a mech, so you can kind of just walk sideways and shoot at the openings when you get them, and it's pretty boring. It's not great. I think it gets a spot probably in the lower C tier. It's slight dodge and firing range simulator. It's nothing special. However, Sonic's Egg Golem I think is actually one of the better fights in the game in terms of bosses. It has some actual dodging, some actual platforming. There's the option to actually recover if you fall into the lower section, and just generally it's one of the more exciting boss designs in the game. And for that reason, I think it earns a spot in probably the low A tier. You know, I don't think it was an exceptional boss, but it's definitely one of the better ones in the game. Now, again with Dr. Eggman versus Tails, it's more or less the same fight, but it's slightly better on the Space Colony arc. There is that weird like explosive shell in the middle of the room that you can use strategically, and both Tails and Eggman have their like special attacks, which, you know, adds another element of surprise, but it's basically just the other fight on steroids. So I think I'm gonna throw them into the lower C tier.
What the? A ghost?
Now, King Boom Boo is actually an interesting one to me. It's the like solely unique fight in the game, and I think that's so interesting that they gave it to Knuckles, and it's this ghost that feels like it has no relevance to the story at all, and I think it's kind of awesome. It's such a silly fight, and that's all I can really say. I think it's fun, you know, digging his shadow out of walls and then beating him up when the sun's out, and for that I gotta give him at least a high B tier. I don't know what would make
make this boss better. I thought it was pretty good, but it just wasn't anything crazy, so that's why it's only B tier. Knuckles and Rouge, oh boy. In my opinion of Dr. Eggman versus Tails on Prison Island was already low, this is lower because at least Eggman and Tails, it's over fast. It's over fast. Knuckles and Rouge, no, it's not over fast. You get the opportunity to fight pretty quickly at the start of the stage, and then the floor opens up and zero gravity arrives. And if you're not just sitting around waiting for the floor to close, you're chasing a target around more or less pointlessly, trying to figure out, you know, where to go. And it's, oh man, it's just such a waste of time. And then finally, the floor closes back up, you get down to the ground, and you sit in a corner mashing the attack button, and then you win. I can't find it in my heart to give them a straight F tier, but they are definitely in the bottom of the D tier. That is easy to say. Now you kind of see a pretty similar pattern of these, you know, character battles. They're not very good in this game. That's maybe being a little generous. Sonic and Shadow is no exception. Chow even tells you in the arena, find a way to lower his defenses, blah blah blah. I literally just mashed the A button on repeat. No skill, no think, no brain, nothing involved. Just mashed A. You know, sure there were a couple instances where I accidentally homing attacked off the cliff and killed myself, but other than that, yeah, I don't know, that's about it. No skill, no think, just D tier. I mean, I'll give Shadow a little edge up because he's the coolest. Shadow and Sonic on Space Colony Arc, very similar in terms of, you know, how much thought goes into it, but at least in this battle, each Shadow and Sonic have their chaos attacks. But what I will say does give this mission an edge up is that it's slightly more entertaining. And what I mean by that is, like, you get the light dashes to keep you going fast. You're always moving versus just like standing in a little square arena. at least you're going somewhere in this one. And you get the pleasure of those really long distance homing attacks, which look so silly, and they just are silly. And because of that, these missions get a slightly higher ranking, right about, there we go. Now, the Biolizard and the Finalhazard. These were like easily the best bosses of the game. They were similar to King Boom Boo in the fact that they were actually unique. They had their own little gimmicks, they had their own special attacks. The only thing that sets the Biolizard a little lower, in my opinion, is the fact that the homing attacks on the little bubbles were like a little jank at times, which caused me a little unnecessary sorrow here and there, but it wasn't anything too devastating, and I'm still going to put it in the A rank. Now, the Finalhazard was one of those bosses that confused me at first because I didn't know what the controls were. I didn't know how to dodge down or how to attack down, which definitely threw me off. But as soon as I understood that, this boss became so much better to me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, there are a lot of bosses in other Sonic games that are very similar to the way that this boss plays. Something like the Time Eater in Generations, and even to an extent Solaris in Sonic 06. But I think this boss did it kind of one of the best. You know, it was pretty transparent what you're doing. I think something like Time Eater is just a visual mess. But this boss, you know, it felt clear. You could dodge out of the way of the beams, and you could bait out the bubbles to create openings. I thought it was a great fight, and obviously Live and Learn definitely bumps it up a couple notches. But one of the underrated parts about this fight that I thought was all the little quips between Sonic and Shadow. I thought that really elevated it. It's like these two guys who have never seen eye to eye or been friends at all of a sudden are just homies, and I don't know, that just hit it for me. Because of that, I'm putting the Finalhazard in the S tier. And there you have it. That's my full ranking for all of the stages in Sonic Adventure 2. And bosses, of course. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, or comment, or subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And if you have opinions on this, please leave them down below. I'd love to hear them. I'd love to discuss with you guys, and let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you all next time.